techniques that is deployed in the world of research and development. Yeah. All right. So the agenda of today's talk that I have, I'll try to make it as crisp as possible because I do understand and admit I am standing in between my presentation and your lunch. So let me try to keep it as crisp as possible and as interesting as possible. I quickly wanted to introduce the company called Zeiss. What do we do in the world of microscopy? And what is actually the current world of microscopy is all about. And in particular, we'll focus on the electron microscope and as I said, field emission scanning electron microscope, which we have in the university as well. The versatile application where this particular technology can be deployed. Because I have a statement which very often I make, except for politics and economics, electron microscope can go everywhere. I think now, given the scenario of government investment in science and the technology development, so now electron microscope has a role to play in economy as well. So only politics it is not yet entered. That's the level to which the need for microscopy is about. Yeah, because if you take any material, yeah, we do characterization, right? Why do we do the characterization? We want to understand the material, its structural properties, its functional properties. So these are all like, the cornerstones when you want to, understand a material of choice or the alternate materials that you wanted to deploy in your own line of research. So two important techniques are very, very important to understand the material. Yeah. And I think one is what you have been listening so far with my, the previous speaker as well. That's the spectroscopy technique. And the other one is microscopy technique. Yeah. So Zeiss is into microscopy technique. And let me quickly introduce the company at first, and we will move forward with the technology as well. This is not working. Okay. Okay. All right. So Zeiss is a foundation. It's not a single person owned company. And we are in this world of microscopy for the last not 130 years, it's almost 133 years now. So whatever technology you talk about microscopy, we were the pioneers. And I think you would have definitely undergone certain, theoretical papers on advanced characterization techniques. And you would have seen that microscopy is one of the prominent technique used for visualizing and, having understanding on the materials and all the other species as well when you're talking about life science application. So we have close to 133 years of experience in the microscopy. And just to give you a flavor of when we started microscopy as such, the first microscopy that came into the market from Zeiss was 1847, 100 years before our independence. Yeah, so that's where we started the microscopy journey, and we are continuously working. And in particular, when we start talking about electron microscope, the first commercial scanning electron microscope was introduced into the market by Cambridge Instruments way back in 1965, right? And by end of 1966, 67, I mean early 67, Cambridge Instruments joined with Zeiss. So when you talk about electron microscope, in a way, Zeiss is also pioneers with all the advanced, innovation that is happening in the world of electron microscope. And what exactly we do? And as you see here, it was established in 1846. And by 1847, we started introducing microscopy as a product into the market. And these are all our focus for the last 133 years, where we focus on innovation and technology development. That's the core value. We continuously keep improvising the technology that we have, irrespective of whether it is hardware or software. That's our core focus. And we promote innovative technology to support scientists, yeah, for the betterment of the society and the mankind, the life of mankind as well. So that's what is our next core value. And it's our responsibility to do the same for the next generation of scientists. That's, the upcoming research scholars and the student community as well. So these are all the core values under which, the entire, the foundational core values of Zeiss over which the entire company is being built. All right. Let me just ask you this question. When someone says microscopy, what comes to our mind? Something this, right? This is what comes to our mind. Because for sure, each and every one of you in this gathering, or even in the virtually who are connected, they would have definitely seen it, felt it, used it either in their, high schooling, higher secondary, or in your undergrads, right? But is this all about microscopy now? Is this what we think? Yes, we do know that there are some microscopes called electron microscope. Maybe you would have heard about atomic force microscope, a lot of microscopes, right? But are we aware of the entire portfolio, or the span, the length and depth of the microscopy portfolio? I'll just play a 2 minutes video clipping, which is going to give you a complete understanding of what is that microscopy you're talking about in the present world. Yeah.
This is a microscope.
And this seems to be a microscope too. Is this also a microscope?
Yes, it is. All these instruments are microscopes.
Stop. Wait a second. This doesn't look like a microscope at all.
True, but it is. And even this huge box is a microscope.
What are all these instruments for? Isn't microscopy about magnifying and resolving small details?
Yes, that is the main function. But there's so much more than simply making small things visible. You can observe living cells in motion. Plot three-dimensional measurements. Identify chemical elements. Count thousands of tiny particles. Characterize surfaces. Create nanostructures. And look into the smallest objects without destroying them.
Now I understand what Ernst Abbe had in mind when he said, the microscopes of tomorrow will not have much in common with those of today.
And from the beginning to now, Zeiss has been playing a leading role in developing a variety of microscopy techniques.
And what will be the future of microscopy?
At Zeiss, the future has already started. It's not only about pioneering new techniques, it's about combining them.
To get different perspectives on my samples?
Yes, only Zeiss enables you to correlate light, electron, ion, and X-ray microscopy, so you can get a thorough understanding of your specimens. Come with us and explore the microscopy of tomorrow.
Yeah, so that's the complete portfolio of microscopy that we have in Carl Zeiss. Yeah, so if you look into the microscopy technique, depending upon the source that is used for visualizing your sample, or trying to collect some analytical data, or to put it in a simpler term, for characterizing your sample, it's been segmented into various categories. Yeah, so starting with a simple, the optical microscope, where we use white light as the source. Yeah, and then we have single wavelength source that is called as the laser confocal. Yeah, it could be any one of the laser lights that can be used for microscopy technique. And then we have set of particle beam microscopes. When I say particle beam microscopes, electron, ion, X-rays, they all fall under the category of particle beam microscopes. And now Zeiss is very unique when we talk about the microscopy technique, because there are no other microscopy manufacturers who are into all these different categories of microscopes that is required for scientific research. Now you might ask, so what does it, or what is the value does it bring in? When I say that it's a complete suite of microscopy technique that is available for your research requirements. Since all this technique or part of our research and development, one of the biggest challenge, I think every one of you will agree with me, is how we are going to correlate, or how we are going to extrapolate the things that we see in atomic scale, or we try to understand in the atomic scale. How are we going to extrapolate to millimeter scale, or centimeter, or for that matter even meter scale? Yeah. For instance, we work on turbine blades, alternate materials, superalloys, but the end application, actually the component dimensions are on meter scale, but we try to see it in a TEM and in the atomic scale. How are we going to extrapolate? So the biggest challenge that we face, or rather as a researchers they face, is how we are able to correlate something which you start seeing it in the nanometer level, but your final end component is going to be in micrometer or centimeter level. So that's exactly where we brought in the concept of correlative microscope, meaning the component or the sample that you would or that you wish to look into any of these microscopy technique can be moved from one microscope to the other microscope, capturing the coordinates of the region that you saw in a simple microscope. Let's say I saw something in a micrometer scale or millimeter scale in a simple microscope. I move the sample from a simple microscope to advanced particle beam microscope like electron or ion microscope. And when I transfer the sample from one technique to the other technique, I transfer it along with the coordinates that I have captured as well. So what happens? Whatever I am seeing it in the micrometer scale, now I'm able to see it in the nanometer scale. Not just seeing, not just visualization, you do the characterization as well. And this doesn't stop with your static, data collection or, characterization. You can do this for the functional characterization as well, because gone are the days where microscopes were meant for only imaging. Now it's an analytical tool. We call it as a lab in a single microscope because you're able to do a lot of in situ experimentations as well for any functional characterization. Yeah, that's one. And moreover, since we are into all these techniques, we have a better understanding of the pros and cons of each of this technique. What is the limitations or advantages and disadvantages of these techniques? And when we interact with, the researchers with their research problems or research requirements, we have a better understanding which microscopy technique and which configuration is going to very precisely deliver the expected outcome on your research requirements. All right, anyway, our focus is today is on the field emission scanning electron microscope. So for the next 5 minutes, I'll quickly run through some of the basics of the electron microscope, how it is differentiating from the simple light microscope. It is kind of a motivation why people moved from using light as a source to a particle beam as the source. Yeah. All right. So fundamentally, if you see one big advantage when you move from the light microscope to an electron microscope is, I think I'm missing a slide here. All right, no worries. Yeah. The one big reason why we are talking about this is because it has a better depth of focus. If you see any scanning electron microscopy image, you always get a three-dimensional feel of it. It doesn't look like just two-dimensional. Yeah. As you can see here on your left, or the images on your left, if I try to see a screw, which is having a length of the threads, which is almost 0.6 centimeter, if I try to see it in a simple optical microscope, either I can see the head of the screw or the final threading of the screw. But if the same screw, if I put it under an electron microscope, I can, focus it in such a way that I'm able to see the entire screw. So this is quite important, especially when post research and development, when it gets applied as the functional parts and when the components gets into the market. Because failure analysis is a very, very big and important topic when you talk about products that are getting into the market. Yeah, that's one reason. Likewise, I think just give me a minute. Just give me a minute. Yeah, so sorry for the technical glitch. So what exactly happens when an electron beam or energy of electrons when it starts interacting with the sample that you wish to characterize or understand its structures or properties or whatsoever it is. Yeah. So we call something called as electron-electron interaction, because your sample is nothing but matter, and matter is made up of atoms. So fundamentally, the samples that we are taking is either periodic or non-periodic. It's fundamentally having atoms. And the electron beam is the ionization that happens in the filament that is taken for creating the electron beam. It's ionization, and we extract only the electrons to enter the column and then interact with the samples. I have a small animated video which will give you a better understanding of it. Yeah. But what exactly happens is when an electron beam interacts with the sample, the first and foremost is it starts having electron scattering. And we are all aware of elastic and inelastic, right? Or if you want me to quickly, brush up on elastic and inelastic, I can do that, or I can just keep moving on. So fundamentally what happens is inelastic scattering is where there is some transfer of energy between the incident electrons and the electrons present in the sample. And many a times what happens, if you recollect our 6th or 7th grade physics, you will remember atoms having periodic orbitals, k, l, m, n shells, and in every shells you have defined set of electrons, and the outermost orbit is high energy electrons, and they are also called loosely bound electrons. You all remember that? Yeah, correct. Yeah. So what happens? These electrons, the moment they get or interact with the electron beam, they gain some energy and they try to jump out of the Fermi level, and that's what is called as your secondary electrons. And since many a times they get generated from the outermost orbit, the secondary electrons carries vital information about your surface morphology or your surface topography. So whenever you want to see something which is very tiny, let's say nanoparticles, I want to measure it 5 nanometer, 2 nanometer. So we always intend to capture the secondary electrons and try to get the data of your, the surface morphology or the feature size or particle size. Yeah. The next one is inelastic scattering. I think I skipped. Something is wrong with it. All right. Okay, or I can explain with this single slide as well. The slide has been jumbled. All right. Okay. So that's a result of inelastic scattering. The other scattering is elastic scattering, right? The electrons may not interact with the incident electrons, may not interact with the electrons present in the atom. They somehow try to, escape without interacting with the electron. But however, when they come into the close proximity of the nucleus, yeah, when they come into the close proximity of the nucleus, electrons are negatively charged, and many a time, the nucleus carries high positive potential. They get deflected, and without interaction, they just come out as backscattered electrons. So these elastically scattered electrons are called backscattered electrons, and these electrons carry vital information about the atoms that is present in your sample. Maybe I can give you an analogy where you will have a better understanding. Let's say I have a tennis ball, and if I try to bounce it on a concrete floor, and I'm trying to bounce it on a lawn, yeah, in the garden, in the lawn. From which floor do I expect a better bounce? Concrete, exactly. Why? It's high dense. Yeah, it's high dense. Atomic number is very different. So that's exactly happens with the backscattered electrons. For instance, if the electron beam interacts with, let's say, a metallurgical component, and let's say mild steel or cast iron, whatever it is, let's say it has carbon and iron. Cast iron, major composition is carbon and iron, right? Now, when the backscattered electron comes out of carbon atom, carbon is a low dense and low atomic number, the backscattered electron yield will be very less. So they will always look darker. But the same electrons, the backscattered electrons, after interacting with the iron atoms, iron is high dense, high atomic number, the electron density yield will be higher, and they start looking brighter. So for materials contrast, understanding the distribution of materials present within your samples, we always try to capture the backscattered electron. So secondary electron is used for surface morphology, high resolution imaging, carbon nanotubes, nanoparticles, organelles in life science samples, or whatever it is. Yeah, we use that. But the moment we start talking about material contrast phase identification, then we start capturing the data using backscattered electron detector. So that's what is kind of a summary here. And you can see here the secondary electrons, it carries the surface information. And you can see here the backscattered electrons gives us the details of density, composition, material contrast, and the crystal orientation as well. It has come to a level where the backscattered electron is capable of giving you the crystal orientation or crystallographic data as well. Yeah. All right. The other major expectation of an electron microscope is the analytical data, elemental data. Yeah. So if you remember, we are talking about inelastic scattering, right? As a result of inelastic scattering, the electrons try to jump out of their Fermi level and they create a valence there. There is a pull. Yeah. By nature, what happens is some of the electrons from the innermost atomic shells, they jump in and they try to, sorry, yeah, they jump in and they try to occupy. But there is a difference in energy, right? From one atomic or orbital level to the other orbital level. So that different energy gets eliminated, or it gets, as characteristics X-rays. It gets emitted as characteristics X-rays. And that is what is used for capturing the analytical data. And these X-ray energies are very, very unique for every single material. It is like, how we have unique fingerprint. The X-ray energy for every material is unique. And the X-ray energy detector has the entire, database of these X-ray energy. The moment we start capturing this X-ray energy, it senses it, and very quickly the smart algorithm tells you what is the chemistry of the material that is present in your sample. That is how EDS happens. In a way, all the other spectroscopy techniques that you expect from an electron microscope, it could be Auger electron, Auger electron spectroscopy, or even it could be cathode luminescence. Every other spectroscopy techniques that can be added to an electron microscope is based on these technique, wherein the energy that is getting out of the sample as a result of relaxation process. Because the moment there is an inelastic collision, the atom gets excited and it has to relax, right? So during the relaxation process, it starts emitting various energy. One form of energy is X-rays. It can also, emit Auger electrons. It can emit cathode luminescence if they are, having photoluminescence property in your sample. So depending upon what information you wanted to collect, you can have those detectors and start collecting all those informations. Yeah. So that's what I've, kind of put it in a small, schematic representation. So you can see here, this is the incident electron beam, and this is what we call it as the volume of interaction with, within the sample. And what happens with secondary electrons, the outermost orbit, it kind of, has the surface information, which is result of inelastic scattering. And this is what happens with elastic scattering, no interaction, but however, they take high directional secondary electrons or the backscattered electrons that comes from the sample, and it gives you the phase or material contrast information. And during the relaxation process, one form of energy gets emitted in the form of characteristics X-rays, which is used for your chemical composition analysis. And one big difference is when you're talking about scanning electron microscope or field emission scanning electron microscope, all the informations are collected from the sample surface. Just the other way, when you talk about transmission electron microscope, we collect informations where the electron beam passes through the sample. Yeah, so that is where is the difference. And that's why we are able to hit atomic level of resolution when we talk about the transmission electron microscope as well. A quick animated video representation of what exactly happens. So you can see here, this is the filament. Then you have set of, the column through which the green color electron beam comes and interacts with your sample. And you can see here, it has a little bit of depth of penetration, which heavily depends on the density of the material, energy of the electron beam, so on and so forth. And you have the secondary electrons, which carries the surface information. You have backscatter electrons, which carries the information about the materials present in your sample. Then you can start collecting your other analytical information like X-rays or cathode luminescence, Auger electrons, whatsoever you wanted to collect. Yeah. So that's a quick representation of how the electron beam interacts with the sample. Now, let me quickly move to the field emission scanning electron microscope. So the first time we introduced the unique architecture for a field emission, because the moment we start talking about field emission scanning electron microscope, we are talking resolutions starting from 1 nanometer and below. Yeah. So it's quite challenging to achieve that. So way back in 1993, we introduced a unique architecture and we termed it as Gemini technology. I'll be explaining what is the uniqueness in the subsequent slides. And over the last 33 years, we have been improvising, on the technology that we developed. Yeah. What we were doing, we were continuously working on the resolution. When we introduced this, we were talking about resolution in the orders of 2 nanometers. That was the best resolution we were able to achieve. Yeah. Right now, not necessarily 2015. We are almost getting, we are getting into 2025. We are talking about resolutions in the orders of 0.4 nanometer, which means 4 angstroms. We are already hitting the atomic scale resolution using the field emission scanning electron microscope itself. Yeah. So that's the improvement we have been doing with respect to resolution. And it is also equally important that we are able to capture the materials, information as well, because I was talking about backscattered electrons, right? So we are slowly moving towards lighter materials. Yeah, we are trying to see what are all the other high tensile materials that can be replaced, in the place of metallurgical samples or metallurgical materials, right? So moving towards that, what happens is there is a need that we are moving towards softer materials, but they are high tensile as well. Yeah, not typically metal or metallic materials. So what happens is capturing the contrast and the detecting mechanisms for achieving or collecting these sort of high resolution data is also equally important, and we have been working on it. And then sample flexibility. I think you all know that for electron microscope, the sample needs to be electrically conductive. Yes? Why? Because electron beam is it's electrical energy, right? What is current? Flow of electrons. Yeah, that's current, right? So imagine just visualize your beam or the source that you're using is a electron beam. It's a negative potential. It's an electrical current that is coming and interacting with your sample. What if your sample is non-conducting? The entire energy starts getting accumulated on the surface. That's what they would have, if you would have come across using an electron microscope, many times the operator or the user would have said, your sample is charging or your sample is bleaching. I don't know how many of you have come across this, but typically what happens is one of the primary requirement of electron microscopy analysis is the sample were expected to be electrically conductive. This was the scenario almost until, let's say, 2000 or till early 2000. This was the scenario. But what we did, we brought in a lot of improvements in the column and improvements in the way we collect the data. So even electrically non-conducting samples can be comfortably imaged in an electron microscope that we have introduced. Likewise, it was always a challenge to image or characterize magnetic materials in an electron microscope. Does anyone know why? Magnetic, that's one half. The other half is what is the lenses that we use in an electron microscope? They are all magnetic lens. It is not like our optical microscope where you use glass lenses or polymeric lenses. No, it is all magnetic lenses. Imagine I bring in a sample which is also magnetic. There will be a stray magnetic flux that gets created, and the electron beam was it was suffering this drift, and it was always a challenge to image magnetic materials in an electron microscope. We overcame that as well. Yeah. And likewise, sensitive samples. When I say sensitive samples, I'm talking about life science sample, tissues, scaffolds, gelatins, or even pharmaceutical applications like silica capsules. You name anything. There is no need for any sort of sample preparation as long as it is completely dehydrated. You can take into an electron microscope and start doing the characterization process. Yeah, these three things what we did, and this is the technology. And I'm not going to get into all the details of this. These are all the highlights. But let me quickly walk you through three major uniqueness of this technology, starting with the beam booster technology. So if you remember, I did mention that if your sample is electrically non-conductive, and imagine its current actually coming and falling on your sample, and if they are not conducting, what happens? Charging. By charging, what do we mean? The entire set of electrons that is coming and falling on the sample surface, they start accumulating on the sample surface. So that's why you're not able to see anything. Now, what if I keep reducing the energy of the electron beam to a certain level where the minimum energy required for interacting with the sample is good enough? If I do that, then I will not have any charging effect at all. So that is called as our low kV. We use the least energy of electron beam that interacts with the sample. So without any challenge, you can start characterizing non-conducting samples, or even it could be insulating materials as well. I have few data to share, and even it could be life science samples as well. No challenge. So that is something what is unique for Zeiss, this particular architecture. And then combination of electrostatic and electromagnetic. If you remember, I did mention that characterizing magnetic materials was challenging, right? Because if you see here, this is the final objective lens. Objective lens is quite important for any microscope, right? We all understand the numerical aperture, objective lens, why it is very important. The best resolution and the focus point is all by the influence of the objective lens. And for electron microscope, objective lens is electromagnetic, right? Now imagine I bring in a sample which is having quite a good, or even you take it's a earth magnetic material or rare earth magnetic material as well. If this sample is magnetic, when I try to bring it close to the objective lens, what is expected to happen? There is a possibility of stray magnetic flux that is established between the objective lens and the sample, right? So what happens? The entire electron beam just simply obeys the magnetic potentials or the magnetic field that is being applied through the lenses, right? Because we understand electric field is perpendicular to magnetic field. Okay, all right. Okay, you're all with me? Okay, all right. So what happens is the electron beam completely is controlled using the magnetic lenses. Now, when the electron beam comes out of the objective lens in order to interact with the sample, starts suffering this stray magnetic flux created between the sample and the objective lens. So what happens? The electron beam will start drifting, and we were not able to do any characterization of magnetic materials at all. So what we did, you see the small, pink colored or magenta colored, lenses that was attached at the end of the objective lens, which was electrostatic. They are not electromagnetic, they are electrostatic. And what they do is they kind of establish a barrier here. Even if the magnetic flux tries to establish between the sample and the lens, it doesn't allow. So your beam becomes super stable even for magnetic materials as well. I have few data to share in the upcoming slides. And yes, of course, we are talking about various acceleration voltage. The recent generation of electron microscope is capable of having an acceleration voltage starting with just 20 electron volts to 30 kilo electron volt. So down to 20 electron volt, I can still characterize and capture images or data. Now, the challenge is not only with respect to generation of electron beam, which is only having a 20 electron volt of acceleration voltage. The detectors also needs to be super sensitive for capturing the data that is coming from the sample where my incident energy itself is only 20 electron volts. So that's why it's very important we have, the most sensitive and robust detecting mechanisms which ensures that you're not compromising on the data that you're capturing using your electron microscope. All right. Uh, I may not, I don't wish to go, to all this thing. But what is the other important factor when you talk about the detecting mechanism is every signal that gets generated from the sample, once the electron beam interacts, they have a particular angle at which they come out of the sample. We call it as the takeoff angle. Yeah, that's very, very important. And when I was talking about elastic collision, inelastic collision, atom relaxation process, everything happens parallelly. It is not a series of events that happens one after the other. It is all simultaneously occurring physical phenomena. So the positional accuracy of the detectors is also very, very important because I did mention about acceleration voltage or the energy of the beam starting with just 20 electron volt. Imagine if the detectors are not positioned in the right angle and you will start missing the information that you wanted to collect. So every detector, secondary electron, backscattered electron, chemical composition analysis using the EDS or your OJ electron, cathode, whatever you name it, the positional accuracy is very, very important. And that's why many a times when you see an electron microscope, especially from Zeiss, they look bulky. They look huge. The chamber looks huge because we take samples in the scale of centimeter. Why do we need such a big microscope? It's all because of the need for having the positional accuracy of these detectors. Yeah. Now, I spoke about the low kV or the least acceleration voltage. So this is a quick example. This is an iron zirconia dioxide composite. You can see here the same sample has been imaged using different acceleration voltages. Yeah, there are two takeaway messages from this particular slide. Very quickly, you can move from one acceleration voltage to the other acceleration voltage. And if I were the person who is trying to characterize, I would prefer maybe 1 kV or 2 kV. Yeah, I would go with 1 kV because the surface detailings are very, very crystal clear and crisp. Yeah, so I would go with 1 kV. So very quickly, you can tune between the various acceleration voltage and you can pick and choose which acceleration voltage is ideal for your sample type. Yeah. And this is again electrically non-conducting material, though it is having zircon, I mean iron and zircon, but the oxidation state doesn't allow it to be completely conductive. And the other message is usually when you start playing with the operating parameter of an electron microscope, you always lose the alignments. Yeah, you end up fine tuning the alignments, which is also not required with the recent generation of electron microscope. You can play around with whatever optical parameters you wanted for capturing the data. You will still retain the same region of interest and you can start collecting the information. And there's an example of a real world photoresist used for lithography application. You can see here the image has been captured. This is the reference image. We captured with 300 volts, no damage at all. When we move to 800 volts, you can already start seeing the damages it has started happening. So this is called as, the most, the common topic as the beam sensitive sample. And these are all called as SIM damages or SIM burns. This is what happens when you don't use optimized operating conditions for collecting the information. Yeah. And this is also quite important when you do for multi-materials. For example, why did I take a PCB material is it has combination of everything. It has very good conducting material, semiconducting material, insulating material, polymers, everything is there. So the stability of the electron microscope needs to be in such a way that irrespective of the type of material or the combination of material that you have in your sample, you can comfortably collect images from each and every component of your, of your sample. That's what I wanted to do. And this is a quick example of collecting, surface morphology information from bad conductors or insulating materials. This is aluminum nanospheres, typically having the step heights less than 3 nanometers. Without any sample preparation, as synthesized spheres has been taken for capturing the surface morphology, and we were very clearly able to do it. These are all some of the unique strength of our electron microscope, which is quite needed for materials research. Same thing, gelatin scaffold, yeah. And these are all biomaterials, 1 kV. Without any challenges, we were able to capture this. Same thing goes for carbon nanotubes. Though they are high tensile material, it is also equally important that when you wanted to capture the surface morphology, thickness measurement, differentiating between single walled and multi-walled, the acceleration voltage is very, very important. If you start playing around with your acceleration voltage, there were instances when single wall carbon nanotubes started looking like they're multi-walled because of the ghost imaging. So that's also quite important. And this is an example where I wanted to stress upon characterizing magnetic materials. We tried doing imaging of magnetic materials on another manufacturer's electron microscope. When we tried going beyond 5 kV and the magnification was somewhere around 5,000 times magnification, it was completely distorted. We were not able to see anything. But when the same sample, when we took under our column, you can see here the resolution at which we were able to push, and very clearly we were able to measure or do a surface morphology investigation on magnetic materials all the way down to 40 to 50 nanometer of dimensions as well. Yeah, that's where we are able to comfortably do it. And this is also again a magnetic sample where it had some inclusions. We were very clearly able to capture it at a very low kV imaging as well. So let me quickly, touch upon some of the advancement that has happened, because the technology can be as superior or as complicated as possible. But it's also equally important that as a user, as a researcher, how easily or with what comfort you are able to use this technology as well, right? That's also quite important. So what we did, we had equal focus on bringing in all the machine learning algorithms, AI, the fancy word, and the graphical user interface, which can be as intuitive and as easy as possible. So we brought in a 4-step algorithm wherein just with 4 steps, you can finish capturing the entire characterization data that you wanted to get from an electron microscope. I'm not going to get into the details, but just a quick update for you. And the other major requirement, or rather the major challenge, is interpretation of data. Yeah. I mean, we can capture beautiful images or beautiful data from your samples. But what if we are not able to interpret it? Yeah. That is where we had the challenge. So what we did, we started bringing in automated workflows, which starts giving you quantitative data from your sample as well. For instance, this is something what we brought in for coatings. And these coatings, once you have your data, and this is a machine learning algorithm, you train the software with one image, telling it which are all is your region of interest, or which is the region which you should, it's like corroded region, right? You train the software, it could be for corrosion, or it could be for thickness, it could be for porosity, it could be for anything. Just do it for one of the images, you train it, and after that, you keep loading n number of images, it gives you the output. Yeah, that's what we did. And this is not just post-processing software. This is also as per the ASTM standard as well, because this is quite important for the medical implants. This we developed along with the medical implant manufacturing industry, and we got the approval as per the ASTM standards as well. Likewise, impurities or inclusions, you can see here on the left how you can train the software. So the ones on the yellow or the inclusion, you do it for one of the images. This all goes for, metallurgical industries where they wanted to inspect the raw materials, incoming raw materials for purity of the material that they use for component manufacturing. Yeah. Corrosion scaling mapping, same thing. You train the software, it starts doing it on its own. And it is not that it only measures and tells you this, it gives you the distribution as well. It could be particle size measurement as well. Yeah, it gives you the distribution, it gives you the mean. It also tells you the range at which you have different particles. Yeah, so everything is possible. So my last part of my presentation is to quickly give you an overview of what is the current trend of these technologies deployed in the industrial level. Academic, I think we have fair idea. I just wanted to give you an overview what is happening in the industrial level as well. Because if you see, these technologies are predominantly used in material science, life science, and industry. And for sure, you would have come across all this. I don't think I need to get into this details, no brainer. You are all, to that level, you understand how electron microscope is used. Let me focus a little bit on the industrial segment, because you're all going to step into the next phase of your life, getting into the industry. So let me share some of the research trends that is happening in industry, and all the upcoming data or data which is happening in India. Most of the data are my own data when I work with the different industries, starting with battery, energy materials. Yeah, it could be any type of electrodes, LCM combination, NCM combination, sodium ion, you name any battery research or any battery alternate, battery materials. All these materials, right from selection of raw materials to its composition to the final end product, they are put under this electron microscope to have a complete understanding. And post manufacturing, if there are any failures, again it comes back to electron microscope to have an understanding of what exactly has gone wrong. And the biggest challenge is having an understanding on the separator material, because they are very, very thin polymeric material. Hardly they are 25 to 40 micron is what is the current industrial standard for separator thickness. And imaging these separator thickness is very, very challenging. Yeah. But that's one of the strength where very often we go and boast ourselves, okay, if it's a separator material, come on, give it. We will do it within minutes. So these are all the strengths. And you can see here, not necessarily only the, electrodes having active material. Electrodes also has polymers and binders, because, you need to have ion transportation happening from one electrode to the other electrode through the, battery separator material. So having an understanding of this porosity, pore size distribution, and the thickness of these strings are also quite important, because this dictates the flow of ions between the electrodes. So something with battery research, polymers. I think polymers gets into versatile fields of application, because I do have something which goes for fabrics. I think N95 mask became a hot topic during COVID, and we were part of one of the research lab in Bangalore, because we came out with our own indigenized N95 mask, right? So the Zeiss electron microscope was used for the final testing and validation and certification as well. So we do that for fabrics. Yeah, again, battery separator materials, polystyrene beads. This can go for, even pharma application, depending upon the drug that you wanted to do. We work with, cosmetic industry. They use a lot of polymers for, in creams. It could be sunscreen lotion or your, whatever creams they are. So they try to have these sort of polymers within it, because fundamentally they create a layer over the skin. They do nothing beyond that. Yeah. So these polymers are quite important for, the coverage and giving a different complexion once you apply it. So all these are all current applications with respect to polymer research. Ceramics, very good alternate material and insulating material. And it has gone to additive manufacturing as well. This is something what we did very recently. additive manufactured ceramic powders, and we were able to characterize all this. And you can see here it is not only, even the oxide particles. And ceramics, we were able to push it down to the limit of tens of nanometer. And all this data has been captured without any sample preparation, as prepared or as manufactured components has been taken for these sort of analysis. So anything to do with ceramic industry, yeah, not just imaging, you can also start doing chemical composition analysis. And you can see here, this is insulating material, and still we were able to do EDS analysis. I mean, for people who don't have the understanding of why capturing EDS is important or EDS is challenging in ceramic, for having a good X-ray count from a sample or from your, the component which you wanted to have an understanding on the elemental composition, for EDS analysis, it is always required that you increase the acceleration voltage. Yeah, the energy needs to be higher because X-rays or excitation of photons. Yeah, so you need to have some standard counts of X-rays, only then you will have the good elemental composition data. But the challenge is the moment you talk about ceramics or electrically non-conducting material, I am bound or I am forced to come down with my acceleration voltage. Yes, because if I increase the acceleration voltage, it will start charging or it will start having the accumulation of energy, and I will not be able to have a clear understanding on the surface morphology. So it was always challenging, but with the recent, the improvement in the EDS detector as well, not necessarily only imaging, with the EDS detector, this data was captured at just 2 kV of acceleration voltage. And you can see here the length scales are like 50 nanometer, and these particles that you're able to see or in the orders of 10 to 20 nanometers. So chemical composition analysis, even on a non-conducting sample, is possible right now. Yeah, electrically non, which was not possible a decade back, right? All right. Aerospace industry, I think you would have heard Lockheed Martin coming into India, Boeing coming into India. Yeah, Airbus is also almost there. Mahindras and Tatas have already, established their joint venture JVs with Lockheed Martin and Boeing. So predominantly what they do right now in India is they are developing this fuselage material. I think you understand this carbon fiber reinforced polymers. That's the major part of your aerospace body components. Yeah. So whatever you see in blue, they're all composite materials. So they are put under, yeah, this is the one. So that has been put under the electron microscope to have an understanding of the mix of carbon fibers in the polymer and the orientation of the carbon fiber as well. We have another microscopy technique called as X-ray microscope. I don't know how many of you have heard of this. We have something called as X-ray microscope. You would have heard of X-ray diffractions, but we also have X-ray microscope, which is a non-destructive testing where this right now you're seeing only in the surface level, right? In that particular microscope, you can start seeing the entire piece of component, how they are looking internally as well. So all the subsurface details. Anyway, so that we do. These are all fasteners because we all understand. I mean, you would have heard cabin pressure, atmospheric pressure, and the pressure needs to be maintained. So every level of the aerospace or aircraft is very, very important. And these fasteners are very, very crucial. Yeah, they seal these different stages of the aircraft. So we do the quality inspection of it and the coatings because aircraft goes at extreme weathers, right? Extreme heat or extreme cold, pressure. So these coatings are very, very important. And we do analysis of the wear and tear of these coatings as well. So this is what we do. So predominantly reverse engineering is happening in India, to put it in a very simpler terms. And when it comes to defense, they're actually building engines and, a lot of other stuffs for the defense sector as well. Automotive, I think I don't need to get into the details. You name anything that is in your passenger vehicle or, commercial vehicle or whatever may be the mode of transport. Every component is being inspected under a microscope for the microstructural analysis that you see here. Inclusion analysis for determining the quality of incoming raw materials. These are all functional materials because you have a lot of moving components in automotive industry, right? So they all have different levels of coating. So this is phosphate coating. We do wear and tear on tires. Yeah, even in, I mean, when coming to Chennai, I was just explaining my colleague. So the Madras Rubber Factory, MRF, JK Tires, Apollo, They all use our electron microscopes to study the wear and tear. Because I think you would have heard of this radial tires, steel radials, but steel radials are all gone. Now it is all carbon fiber reinforced radials. Yeah. So that we do. Failure analysis, as I said, even foams. I mean, some of the not necessarily imported now, even Indian cars as well, Indian manufactured cars as well. You would have heard of this memory foams, right? They retain the the shape, or depending upon the weight of the passenger who uses that seat quite often, it retains the shape. How does it do it? So we do the complete inspection on the porosity, the structure of these foams, and we kind of not we, the manufacturers kind of get an understanding of which foam material at what density and what porosity level is capable of retaining these sort of memories for the passengers. Electronics, electricals and electronics, I don't think, again, these are all some things which are quite common, but I just wanted to quickly walk you through the various applications, starting with, quality inspection of integrated circuits, to the solder bumps that goes for PCB assembly, to, uh, I mean, even cables, switches, springs, you name anything. Yeah. Because not necessarily the dimensional accuracy is important. The quality of these components are even more important, because now we are slowly moving towards all automated functions in the electronics industry. Everything is automated. Yeah. Touch-based sensors, a lot of things have come into the market. So it becomes, the quality of this becomes even more and more important, because end of the day, it becomes a question of life and death. Yeah. Even if you take your normal, automatic vehicles, you have something called as engine control unit. And this is what is the inspection of engine control units. Imagine if there is a short circuit that happens in your ECU, engine control unit, engine immobilize. Yeah, engine immobilizes. Imagine if this happens in the aircraft. You are flying, there is a short circuit, engine immobilized. Problem solved for the aircraft, not for the passengers. Yeah. So they are all very, very important. And we do these sort of analysis with the things. Implants. Yeah. Dental implants, heart stents. These are all magnesium coated heart stents. We work with Vascular Concept, a US-based company, where they are doing this. So I don't know how many of you have seen the how a stent works when it has been inserted in the arteries. So they go inside the artery in the crimped fashion, and once it goes, they do the uncrimping. Yeah, because they wanted to extend the artery valve, and then the block needs to move and blood starts to circulating. Imagine during the uncrimping process, something goes wrong with the stent edges, because these are all laser machined. Yeah. So it's very, very important. So we do that analysis. I think dental implants, anything we do in our jaw is also very important, because it is very close and near to the brain. We do, microstructures of hip joints, knee joints, because these are all the most important functional area where our entire body weight falls on, right? Hip joints and knee joints. So the roughness of these materials are also very important. So this is frequently checked. Artificial tissue scaffolds. This is with one of the famous hospital from Chennai. Uh, I'm not allowed to name the hospital, but yeah, we are working with them on a R&D project, where patients who suffer loss of skin and flesh, maybe in road accidents or fire accidents, they are developing the artificial tissue scaffolds as well. So that's with respect to medical devices. Pharmaceuticals, that's very big area. You name anything that is happening, right from the nucleation or formulations of drugs to the impact of these drugs, the clinical trials I'm referring to, everything goes through the microscopy analysis. So these are all like, the polymer beads, which I was talking about. They are the drug excipient. So the drugs gets coated on top of this, and it is formulated as a, or it is compacted as a tablet, and that's what we take in. Yeah. So likewise, the Raman spectroscopy, if you remember in the beginning, I did mention that it is no more just an imaging technique, but you have a lot of things that can be added. You can have a Raman microscope added in an electron microscope. That's what we did here. This is again one of the pharma industry in the North India. So they wanted to understand the distribution of the API to the, active drugs to the excipients. So we were very clearly able to do it. And this is a 40 nanometer particle. And you can imagine the microspheres that is present inside, that is even more smaller. We were able to do it. Yeah. And even hydrogels, the ointments that you use for, pain relief, or those sort of ointments, because, these hydrogels have this porous structures. So the drug particles is actually sitting in this porous structure. So that's why when you apply the ointments, they try to penetrate through the hair follicles, yeah, and then they try to enter the dermis and epidermis, and then they try to create some, relaxing sensation when you apply these ointments. Yeah. Life sciences again, starting with the cosmetic industry, shampoos. Yeah, you name any cosmetic industry, they make shampoos, right? And fundamentally, they are not cosmetic products. They are all harsh chemicals, right? Anyway, not getting into the details of it, we support them with respect to the impact of this, and they are working to see how best they can reduce the impact. Yeah, nothing it has to do with the improvement of any human health. Yeah. Bacterias, Pseudomonas is one of the digestive bacteria. I don't know how many of you are from life science background. So Pseudomonas is a good digestive bacteria we all have in our guts. It is good as long as it is in our guts. If it goes to the wrong places, maybe in our eye, we lose our eyesight if it is not addressed at the right time. Yeah. Pollens for hybrid crops, people who are, I don't know if you're from plant and crop sciences, having the understanding of pollens is very, very important. And that's why honeybee is the most important character in a food chain, right? Food chain ecosystem, right? All right. So anatomy of insects, mosquito eye, spider head. This is quite interesting sample. This is from a institute in Sri Lanka. I don't know whether I have time, but maybe I'll take a few seconds. So this particular family of spiders, they make the webs in silk, and they are far more stronger than the silk that is made by the cocoons or the silkworms. Yeah. So they were trying to see how they can make synthetic. They want to study this and see how they can make synthetic synthetic silk as well. This is human tooth. This is a decayed tooth. Yeah. I mean, you would have heard of this RCT, root canal. Taking your tooth, doing a RCT, and then putting a cap. So fundamentally, these are all the bacterias which actually eats away the enamel of your tooth, and this is the dentinal tubule that is exposed. And that's why people who are suffering from tooth decay, when they have something too cold or too hot, they have the sensitivity because immediately it passes through the dentinal tubules and it affects your nerve endings in the gum. That's exactly what it happens. Yeah. Again, textiles. I think we are third. Yeah, we used to be the leading textile exporters, and a lot of research was going on with respect to fabrics. So natural fabrics, artificial, synthetic, longevity or the yield of these fabrics, everything they wanted to take it in a very scientific approach. Now they've started deploying all this sort of microscopy technique. You would have heard about medicated fabric, scented fabric, all this, we have seen all this under the microscope, and we have a fair understanding of, starting with your band-aid that is used. They have silver nanoparticles. I don't know how many of you have seen. After opening the band-aid, if you see it, it will look, in silver color. It's because it is having silver nanoparticles. Yeah, they are good, antimicrobial properties. Silver has a good antimicrobial properties. So, yeah, that's all we do. Yeah, and this is the image that got qualified for the N95 mask during the pandemic. Yeah. Textile industry, food and beverages. Again, this was very surprising for us when we started, but we came to know that this is also quite important, where starting from rice grains all the way down to table salt, they put it under a microscope for not necessarily every time for the nutritious value, but many times it is for the aesthetic appearance of, because we don't have any raw foods that is available in the market, right? It is all processed. So that they try to do it, and during the polishing process, significant amount of nutritious factors are getting lost. So the food industry, and we are also becoming more and more cautious about the food that we intake, right? And we are getting fascinated by the tag name organic, and we have no clue what is organic is all about. Anyway, so that's exactly what the food and beverages industries are trying to do. One last representation of what are the other application with respect to in situ. If people, if you're from mechanical or physical sciences, where you wanted to understand the mechanical property of certain materials, the strength of the material, so this is an in situ attachment. We call it as the tensile stage that can go inside an electron microscope. You can see here this is a polystyrene ball, and there is a load applied from either side of it, and as you keep applying the load, we start capturing the data. So very precisely, at what load the failure has incurred, how the fracture propagates, everything you can start seeing it in the real time. This is an example of just tensile. In situ Raman, I already showed you the pharmaceutical example. So these are all some things that has come recently into the, as a module in an electron microscope, and it doesn't stop there. We have all this sort of additional modules that can go inside a electron microscope. And please remember, we cannot have everything in the same electron microscope. Some of them we can have because there are limitations with respect to the chamber in which you can have these modules. So it could be for any functional characterization as well, because these were all something which was not available a decade back. Yeah, you do the functional characterization in some other tool and then bring it to an electron microscope to have an understanding of it. But now these modules can be added along or configured with an electron microscope, and you can do it in the real time, which has much more, which gives you much more understanding of your functional properties. The last slide, if you remember in the beginning of the slide, I said, since we manufacture all these different categories of microscope, we are able to bridge the length scales, right? I'm not going to get into the details again, but let me quickly show you this image. So you see here, this is a particle, yeah, which was seen under a light microscope. Now the customer interest was to understand what is the chemistry of it. Using a simple optical microscope, I cannot find the chemistry because I need to have an electron microscope with EDS for understanding the chemistry, right? Now, one of the biggest challenge when you move from one microscopy technique to the other microscopy technique is the way the data looks. For example, if you see something under a light microscope, they are colorful. Yeah, but when you see data from your component or sample in an electron microscope, they are all grayscale. And it is very hard to differentiate between, let's say, in your component, you have few hundreds of particles. How are we going to differentiate which particle is what? Yeah, because there is no color code for identification. So what we did, we brought in the correlative, module, wherein we were able to move the sample from one microscopy to the other microscope. And when we move it, we exactly or precisely capture the XY coordinate of this particular particle in your component. And very precisely within a matter of 7 or 8 minutes, we move the sample from one microscopy to the other microscopy, go back to the same region of interest, and this is how your data representation looks. On the light microscopy image, you can start superimposing the electron microscopy image, and you can superimpose your EDS data as well. So this is something what is very unique, and it takes you out of all the ambiguities or question, or challenges usually when it happens. Are you sure that this is the particle that you saw, or this is the region of interest that you saw in the optical microscope is what you're seeing in the electron microscope? And please remember, this is not only for these two microscopy technique. We can do it for any microscopy technique that I introduced in the earlier slides. Yeah. All right. So that's all I have got to present today. And thank you so much for your patience. And I open up the stage for questions or doubts or further information. I would be more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Friends, quickly one or two questions. Very please. Yes. Yes. Do you have any?
So I think it's good information, but I have one doubt. So biological sample preparation, I think under the efficient, do you have any specified sample preparation methods? So there are two things.
130, 230.
It definitely has sample preparation when you talk about license. The first and foremost, it depends upon the first question is whether you want to see it in its native condition or you're okay to dehydrate the sample and then see it.
Yeah, the problem is that we have to observe the morphology without any damaging that the sample one thing.
Yeah.
Once treated one, we should find out the what are the places is the cell morphology is the damage.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So now there is a technique called as critical point drying. Yeah. So critical point drying can be used for dehydrating the sample without causing major deformation on the morphology. I wouldn't say it is 100% perfect, but depending upon the sample and the level of moisture content,
you can definitely do a very good dehydration and then you can do it. Now, when you say that you want to, differentiate